Welcome to the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast, where you can take a deep dive to explore the pitfalls and potential of the obsessive compulsive personality, offering hope and help for perfectionists, workaholics, micromanagers, type A personality, and control freaks. Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Trosclair, psychotherapist, Jungian analyst, and author of the Healthy Compulsive book, blog, and podcast. Ever had a conflict about whether to comply with expectations or to resist them? This conflict is at the heart of the obsessive-compulsive personality. Though it may manifest differently for different people, many of us, when we feel pressured, rebel against the pressure by saying no and putting up a wall, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. Resistance is definitely an important skill to cultivate, and cultivating it requires that we understand our motivations for it. Join me as I look beneath the surface at what goes on in demand resistance. This is episode 43 of the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast, Demand Resistance, what it is, what drives it, and how it serves or cheats us. Imagine a couple going through fertility treatment. They're expected to make love at certain times to increase their likelihood of a productive outcome. One or both partners may find themselves suddenly short on libido and long on headaches, unconsciously resisting the doctor's prescriptive intrusion into a very private space, even though this means not having kids or the ultimate sensual pleasure of conjugation. Why? In a previous post, I wrote about demand sensitivity, the tendency to magnify in our mind what others hope for, expect, or command from us. We can create an elaborate story about how serious those expectations are and then make it our priority to prevent disappointing others by being perfect and controlling. But that may also mean disappointing ourselves because pleasing others may mean not getting our emotional and practical needs met. In reaction to this, we may adopt another position that's just as self-denying, demand resistance. When you feel pressure from others, you refuse to do what you think they want you to do. Your position becomes, I must, therefore I won't, even though this means that you pass up benefits that you'd otherwise enjoy, like really luscious coitus. According to personality theory maven Theodore Millon, the defining conflict of those with obsessive-compulsive personality is the conflict between obedience and defiance. The more they try to please, the more they resent. And for some, the more they resent, the more they resist. I wrote my thesis on this dynamic as part of my psychoanalytic training. It was called Duty and the Death of Desire. I realized, having seen it all too often in my practice, that as soon as we think we're supposed to do something, even something we had previously desired, we may lose the desire to do it and stubbornly refuse to do what's expected of us, that is, our duty. The word no raises a wall that may keep out unreasonable expectations, but it may also keep out things we need for fulfillment as well. Demand resistance and setting boundaries are sometimes the right response to an overly demanding situation. Sorting out when it is the right response requires that we examine the results of resistance, that is, are our needs getting met this way, and what our motivations are. What or who is really driving us to put up the wall? Rarely is the answer to that singular. And if you want to use your resistance skillfully, you'll need to understand as many of your motivations as possible. And that's what we'll explore in this post. Resistance is particularly hazardous for people with obsessive-compulsive tendencies. They're already programmed to control, and it's all too easy to slip into something more comfortable, like resistance, in order to maintain that control. For some, the wall of defiance goes up only after a long period of compliance. For others, defiance has been their preferred stance from the time they refuse the potty. Forget how bad it feels to hold it in or carry it around in your diaper. Autonomy overrides all. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. And for still others, rather than choosing compliance or defiance, they sit constantly and very uncomfortably on top of the wall between the two. This results in more than a pain in the tush. The mind is never at peace because it's always obsessing about which side of the wall to fall on, compliance or defiance. Behavior becomes reactive rather than proactive. Pursuit of what's most fulfilling gets blocked. Here are 5 common motivations that drive people to build a wall of defiance. Yours may differ. Motivation number 1, protecting our coping strategies. How you handle the conflict between compliance and defiance will depend partly on your personality subtype and your go-to coping strategy. Not everyone reacts in the same way. I've previously described 4 different types of compulsives, 4 different ways of using control and perfection to handle insecurity. These can be adaptive or maladaptive. While each type has a different strategy for handling their anxiety, they are similar in that they may all become resistant when they feel that their coping strategy is threatened. Let's see how it looks in each of these 4 types. First, the leader, teacher, or boss. This type complies with principles but defies the expectations of people. They're driven by the idea of doing the right thing, and they have no reluctance to tell everyone else that they should be as well. Others may want them to be nicer, but they will resist that so that they can answer to a higher authority. Underneath their control, this type of compulsive feels responsible for bringing order to the chaotic world around them. It's part of the identity they use to deal with their insecurity. When they refuse what others expect, the refusal may come not just from their principles, but also from a need to protect their identity of being knowledgeable and in charge, an identity that they don't want to relinquish. So, for example, Tony was a teacher at a private high school. He had a reputation as a demanding and combative teacher, which worked well for a few of his students, but left many feeling disrespected and discouraged. He also insisted on being the teacher in the teacher's lounge as well, which didn't exactly make him the belle of the ball. Complaints were lodged against him by both students and faculty. The administration asked him to simply tone it down a little bit, but he refused to change. His ideas and principles were too precious to him, and, in his words, he would not be silenced. But it wasn't just his principles that were at stake here. Tony coped with his anxiety by dominating, and this strategy felt threatened by the school's request to tone it down. Tony lost his job. Next is the worker-doer. This type will neglect themselves and loved ones to meet real or imagined expectations by working, fixing, or producing. They're less likely to engage in out-and-out resistance, except when they use their work itself as a form of resistance to appeals from others to slow down. For example, Cecil had a demanding and rewarding job as an attorney. She genuinely loved the work, but she also desperately needed the kudos lavished on her at her firm. When her husband asked her to spend more time with him, she said, "I've got too much work to do, and you're making it hard for me by asking me to come home earlier, go to your mother's house for Sunday afternoon dinner, and watch Seinfeld reruns with you. You're pressuring me too much." Cecil coped with her anxiety by eliciting praise at her job. Taking time away from that felt too threatening to her security. They eventually divorced. Now we're going to talk about the server, friend, people pleaser. Demand and expectation sensitivity is especially strong in this type of obsessive compulsive. They tend to deal with it directly by trying to please personally. Their fear of disappointing others leads them to try to preempt it by imagining the worst demands and expectations possible and meet them so that they don't let others down. They tend to worry about what others think about them more than how they themselves feel. They're dependent on the approval of others, and they enlist their perfectionist, planning, and precisionist tendencies to reach that goal. But such devotion can eventually lead to defiance and to denying themselves the deep pleasure of relationships, the gratification of generosity, and the satisfaction of seeing a project through to completion. So, for example, Sarah had tried to be what she thought was a good wife and mother. She knew it was old-fashioned, but it meant a lot to her to make the people around her happy. But after 15 years of this, with what she felt was little appreciation and lots of presumptions, she exploded. I haven't done a damn thing for myself since I can't remember when, and I won't keep sacrificing myself. If you want the house perfectly clean, hire a cleaner. I'm not doing it anymore. Sarah coped with her insecurity by trying to please everyone. And while her own internal craving for freedom felt threatening to her, she knew that there was something important in it. As she set more boundaries, the family went through a rocky period, but they got past it. And Sarah got past her own fear of not pleasing others. She learned to find a balance between autonomy and love. And now we'll talk about the fourth subtype of obsessive-compulsive personality, the thinker-planner-obsessor. This type may become paralyzed just thinking about how they can perfectly complete projects. Their fear of not reaching their goals actually leads them to fall short because they fear not getting it right and get stuck chasing their tails in perfectionistic circles. Other thinker-planners end up isolating to avoid demands and expectations. Their avoidance might look like procrastination, but it can actually be defiance. For instance, Sam worked as an estimator for a construction firm. He had a reputation for accuracy and meticulousness, as well as for being slow and late. When the owner of the company started pressing him to be on time and more productive, Sam fell behind, badly. The demands were higher, but they weren't unrealistic. He fell behind partly as a sort of strike, protesting the new demands, but also because he feared not being able to use his coping strategy, which is planning, obsessing, and executing his task perfectly. When he had to work more quickly and effectively, his strategy of being meticulous felt threatened. He eventually quit and found a job that didn't pay as much, but didn't pressure him either. So now, motivation number 2, managing burdens. One source of demand resistance is the compulsive's already heavy burden of self-imposed shoulds. Whenever anyone else piles additional expectations on them, it's too much to carry, and the otherwise compliant good boy or good girl drops everything. Can't you see how hard I'm already working? And since compulsives may exaggerate what others expect of them, this is not an uncommon pattern. The motivation here is simply to keep from taking on too many demands. This can be adaptive if done consciously and with good communication, but the danger is that the wall they build is fixed rather than flexible, and it may exclude activities that would meet emotional needs, such as connection with others and the satisfaction that comes with completing a challenging project. Motivation number 3, preservation of autonomy and cultivation of the true self. It might appear that a primary motivation for resistance in compulsives is to maintain control and power. This might be the case, but a deeper motivation may not be so much control or power, but autonomy. Resistance may be enlisted when we feel that our independence is being taken from us. This isn't necessarily maladaptive, but it can be if done unconsciously. Our expert in this field is Tommy, the troublemaking 2-year-old. Famous, of course, for his ability to take down a household with his adamant and steadfast no. As infuriating as this is to parents, such stubbornness is an essential stage in his psychological development. There are a few important steps he accomplishes by doing this. 1. He embarks on early stages of separation individuation, the psychological process of developing an identity as a whole person separate from his parents. If Tommy doesn't accomplish this, he'll fail to launch and instead look to his parents for a free lunch. Saying no is how he begins to develop a separate identity and the skills that come with it. Second, he learns what he does and doesn't like. Third, he experiments with having some control and responsibility for his own life. So there's something instinctual about his defiance, a necessary ingredient in psychological maturity for all of us, separating from our parents and cultivating our unique individual self. A deep need to be true to ourselves often motivates resistance. When we feel that our independence, authenticity, or autonomy is threatened by the expectations of others, we fight like our existence depends on it. Being true to ourselves is the foundation of individuation, the deep urge to realize our unique potential and become whole, which, as Carl Jung has written, is a deep compulsive instinct. If some of us didn't have this fierce commitment to our unique perspective and the resulting creative benefits for human adaptation, we'd still be hunting and gathering, suffering excruciating toothaches, and never having chance to hear Pink Floyd's The Wall, watch Game of Thrones, or tenaciously root for the White Sox for just one more season. But separation and individuation don't always go smoothly, and some get stuck in their stubbornness, never reaching the point where they can be more conscious and flexible. Their resistance might feel necessary to protect against the theft of their soul, a theft that isn't necessarily happening. But then many needs, both practical and emotional, don't get met because interpersonal cooperation is a necessary ingredient for many of those needs. Motivation number 4, passive-aggressive revenge. If you feel that others have been unrealistic in their expectations, you might feel angry at them. And a questionable way to get back them is to not do what they want you to do, which of course is the definition of passive-aggressive. Take out the garbage? No way. Show up on time? Forget about it. Lose or gain weight? I'll show you. Sometimes we imagine that if we withhold behavior this way, the demanding party will get the message, don their sackcloth, repent, and treat us like the kings and queens we really are. It rarely works that way, but that doesn't keep us from trying. At other times, our motivation is not just to get them to drop their insistent demands, but to punish them for having had such demands, regardless of the consequences for ourselves. Motivation number 5, protest against an imperfect world. Demand resistance may be enlisted to protest a stupid and unjust world. It might be justified as a refusal to cooperate with an idiotic world and what it demands of us. This may be either noble or nonsensical, courageous or cop-out. The danger for compulsives is that they feel the world should be a certain way, which is perfect, of course, and they refuse to engage when it doesn't meet those standards. This can manifest in parking in a no-parking zone, not paying taxes, or making it a point to be unhappy in a cold, cruel world that paradoxically overvalues happiness. Protest through resistance can be very constructive. It's part of what keeps society, parents, and unrealistic managers who have no idea what your job entails from going overboard in their demands. The key to using it skillfully is learning to consciously sort out which motivations are driving us. Otherwise, we're like a kid in a push-car stroller, feeling delighted that we're in charge when really our mother's in back driving us where it wants us to go. That is, our mother complex. Here's an example of what could be a self-destructive protest that would really be motivated by an expectation that we're taken care of, which is one type of mother complex, rather than foster change. For example, I'd love to protest the large healthcare system where I see my doctors by just up and canceling all my appointments. While the medical care itself is usually good once I get in the door, getting into the door pits me against abysmal communication, lack of consideration, and more mistakes than one would expect from such a respected institution. They demand 3 times the work from me to just get in the door than they should. It's infuriating. It shouldn't be this way. They should be taking care of me. But it's the same everywhere, and I'd only be cutting off my nose to spite my face if I dropped out. Then where would I go? I'd like to think that I'd be communicating something valuable that way, but I know perfectly well that no one would notice or care. My real motivation would not be to improve the situation, but to express my anger at not being taken care of. And then my medical needs really wouldn't be met. Here are some suggestions for using your resistance wisely. First, personify your inner resistor. Ask what they need, but don't let them take over completely. Question your coping strategy. Is it adaptive or maladaptive? Is it really threatened by complying? What is your individuality for? Would that purpose be blocked if you didn't resist? Will being passive-aggressive get you what you want? Will the other person come to respect your autonomy if you resist or punish them? Might there be a more effective way to communicate? Identify your motivations for protest. The danger is that you want to preserve personal control or simply express frustration rather than advance a just and realistic cause. Expecting the world to always be intelligent and just may not be realistic. Choose your battles. Deploy a flexible wall. Construct a wall that you can easily open and close rather than one with no flexibility. And finally, does resistance block your needs? Is there anything you deprive yourself of if you put up that wall too rigidly? You can find transcripts of this podcast with links to research sources and lots more at the Healthy Compulsive blog, www.thehealthycompulsive.com. If you'd like to subscribe to the Healthy Compulsive podcast, hit that subscribe button. And for a thorough guide to cultivating the positive potential of the compulsive personality, find my book on Amazon, The Healthy Compulsive, Healing Obsessive Compulsive Personality Disorder and Taking the Wheel of the Driven Personality. And if you find any of these helpful, let others know by leaving a review. Till next time, enjoy the drive.